Hello, and welcome to our video about the German unification process that'll happen in the mid to late 19th century. In this video, we'll look at who the leaders are of this unification process, the Austro-Prussian War, the Franco-Prussian War, and then the shifts to the balance of power. After the Congress of Vienna, there were 39 different small little German states that are going to form the German Confederation. And you see here in this map what the boundaries were for everyone right there at the end of that time period. Now, Austria and Prussia are going to kind of dominate this different confederation of German states, but Prussia has a slight advantage. So most of the people living there, they speak German. They have the most powerful army in Europe, the Prussians do. They're industrializing faster than everyone else, and they have a lot of resources that Austria just doesn't have at this point in time. But then in 1848, democratic revolutions break out all over Europe, and we've talked about some of those. And as a result, Prussia creates a liberal constitution to limit the power of the king, much like, other revolutions during this time period. And that leads us to the leaders of this German unification process. The first person that you need to know about is King Wilhelm I. So he is the new king of Prussia, and he succeeds Frederick Wilhelm to the throne in 1861. So he comes in after all of these new negotiations about limiting the rights of kings have already been decided. And he's a big supporter of the Junkers. Now remember, the Junkers are basically the wealthy landowning class in Prussia. They're like the nobility there, and they have strongly conservative ideas, and they oppose liberal ideas like, democracies, constitutions, all the things the French Revolution kind of, promoted. Just knowing all of that, you should be able to see exactly the kind of ruler King Wilhelm I is. But he decides he wants to increase the size and strength of his military, and he has to ask Parliament for that money per, the new rules. But Parliament does not want to give him that money. So, what does he do? He goes and picks a new prime minister in order to get what he wants. You know, Common theme for the time period here for kind of more absolute monarchs. And the person he selects to be this new prime minister is this man, Otto von Bismarck. And Bismarck, he's a conservative junker, so he fits the mold. He's from that noble class in Prussia. He is more monarchy leaning, and he becomes the prime minister in 1862. And he's known for his ideas called realpolitik, the politics of reality. So basically, this idea that politics leave no room for idealism. You should be somebody of action. We can't just have our ideas in the sky without kind of true intent behind them. And he's known as the Iron Chancellor for his ideas and his very powerful rule. Just to give you an idea of, the type of man Otto von Bismarck is, here's a quote that he gave during his speech, his first speech as prime minister. He says, "Not by speeches and votes of the majority are the great questions of the time decided. That was the error in 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood." So he's basically saying that like we shouldn't care what the mass of people want in our country, because that's not how the best decisions get decided. We should instead decide by like who's kind of strongest and most powerfully willed. Okay, so now that we've talked about the two people who will be responsible for German unification in the 1860s, let's talk about their attempts earlier, just like 10, 15 years before, to unify. So the first call for German unification happens during the Frankfurt Assembly in 1848. And Prussia really wants to unify these different German states, but there's this big debate on who should rule over them. And so we get divided here between the Habsburgs ruling in Austria and the Hohenzollerns of Prussia. And they're asking for not just unification. During this assembly, there's a lot of talk about kind of more liberal movements coming into Germany at the time, too. Lots of different freedoms, rights to vote, things like that. And the ruler of Prussia at the time, Wilhelm I's predecessor, Frederick Wilhelm, he refuses the crown altogether because they try to give him kind of a smaller chunk of this German consolidated state. And he refuses based on the idea that a monarch has divine right and they could not receive authority from an elected assembly. So basically, just because those people voted on him, he was like, no, you don't get to vote for me. Like, I am here because I have the divine right to be here, and it's through that divine right that I should be the ruler, not you voting me in. And so he refuses it. And so the German states don't unite. But that thought, that sentiment carries on into, the next king. And so that's why they kind of feel like you have to gain these territories through force, through will, rather than through people just electing to be there together. They felt like it diminished the power of the monarchy otherwise. Which brings us to part two, the Austro Prussian War. War between Austria and Prussia was something that was foreshadowed for a long time. They're both kind of in that same region. A lot of territory has gone back and forth between them over the years, and they both kind of lay claim to those greater German states. And so this letter kind of represents that. This is from Otto von Bismarck to one of the ministers of Austria in 1856. So a good, little less than a decade before the conflict actually occurs. But in here, he's saying that, I don't think that we can exist together as long as there's that land in between us that we both want. I don't think there's any other solution. Then we're probably going to have to fight about it. Now, between when that letter is written and when the conflict between Austria and Prussia actually starts, there is a short time period where Prussia and Austria are in an alliance together in a war against Denmark to win two border provinces, Schleswig and Holstein. And it's a pretty quick victory. Prussia ends up governing those two territories, but Bismarck is going to be a little bit sneaky here, and he uses those like two border countries there to purposely stir up conflict with Austria. So he had in secret negotiations between Italy and Prussia that they agreed to help each other out. And he had agreements from France and Russia that they would stay neutral if he was to start something with Austria. So he lays this groundwork ahead of time. And these tensions that he, kind of builds with Austria leads to them declaring war on Prussia in 1866. And this leads to what's called the 7 Weeks' War. So you didn't hear that incorrectly. It was, in fact, about 7 weeks. It was not very long. Prussia basically just humiliates Austria. They win super quickly. And Austria has to give the region of Venetia to Italy because, Italy was partnered with Prussia. And Prussia is going to take control of northern Germany. And in 1867, the remaining states of the North, fueled by this nationalist pride, are going to join Northern Germany, called the Northern German Confederation, which is dominated by Prussia. After the war is over, Bismarck was pretty concerned that Russia might have a lot of ill will towards them for the things that he, had done. So he decides rather than try to conquer Austria and have them like take revenge against Germany later on, he wanted them to be their own independent state. So he allows just Austria to be a state in itself. And this leads to our second great conflict, the Franco Prussian War. Okay, so under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, the northern German states had now come into the Prussian Empire, but they're still lacking support of some of the southern states. So Bismarck's thinking, how can I win these guys like their support? What would make them want to join us? And so he thinks, man, maybe a war with France would rally the South to do that. They need a threat to come and join us. So he publishes an altered version of this diplomatic telegram that he had received from France. This is him being really sneaky here, and he changes it to make it sound like Wilhelm, the king, was insulting the French, and then he publishes it and like sends it to France. And reacting to this insult, France declares war on Prussia, and that's what starts the Franco-Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War is another example of Prussia's kind of military prestige of this time period. So the Prussian army, they pour into northern France, and they've already got kind of the main French forces surrounded. They take another 80,000 French prisoners, even Napoleon III, the ruler of the time. And for 4 months, the Parisians try to hold off the Germans, but eventually they've just blockaded them so well that they can't get any supplies in, and they're forced to surrender. And the Franco-Prussian War did what Bismarck wanted it to do. It was the final stage of German unification. That nationalistic fever also really like appealed to the people of southern Germany that were kind of a part of the action as well. And they finally accepted Prussian leadership. So between these two different conflicts and a bunch of other, kind of secretive dealings, Bismarck creates this united Germany, and he uses his diplomacy and warfare techniques to accomplish this task. And through the proclamation of 1871, Wilhelm I is crowned the Kaiser or Emperor of Germany, and he does it at the Palace of Versailles, which is kind of a power move because they invaded France. And then Germany is now officially united. They're known as the Second Reich, which is a name given to the new German Empire. Okay, then the final thing we'll talk about today is how does all of this change the balance of power? If you recall, the Congress of Vienna, that meeting right after the fall of Napoleon, where they got together to decide what to do with France and what to do with Europe, they established that there are basically five great powers in Europe: Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. This people that had seats at the table. But now, by 1871, it's pretty clear that Britain and Germany were the most powerful of those countries. And the balance that had existed before was now broken. Those other countries were not nearly as advanced or developed as Britain and Germany. Because of this new balance of power, there's also going to be some new alliance systems created because of this. So there's two main ones. One is called the Three Emperors League, and it's alliance between Germany, Russia, and Austro-Hungary. And then the other is the Triple Alliance, which should sound pretty familiar to you because it lasts all the way through until World War I, and that's between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Which, when you look at the breakdown of which countries are kind of, aligning together, this shouldn't be surprising. These countries all have more conservative leaning governments. They're all trying to expand with an emperor who kind of has more power than the parliament. So it makes a lot of sense that they would band together. In 1890, there's a new Kaiser, William II, and he actually fires Otto von Bismarck. He tells him, pack your bags, you're retired now. He felt that his policy, his foreign policy specifically, was not strong enough. And the Kaiser kind of saw him as like the old guard. He was like, yeah, European politics, but I really want to compete with Britain and France for colonial power abroad. And I don't think that you really know how to do that. And that actually was a big mistake on the part of the Kaiser because he basically started unraveling a lot of the alliances that Otto von Bismarck had kind of created, and it increases tension in Europe. And those of us that have studied history know that this period leading up until World War I, Europe is just a powder keg. It's waiting to go off and explode, and his actions definitely contribute to that. Okay, that's the end of our time on German unification. Thanks for watching.